It began as many strange cases do, with a person asking for help. Not from a psychic, not from a priest, not even from the police. A woman walked into a bookstore in Westwood, California in 1974 and approached two men giving a lecture on parapsychology. She told them something was attacking her, not just scaring her, not haunting her, but attacking. She said it was invisible. She said it was violent. And she said it wasn't human. The woman's name was Doris Bither, a single mother of four living in a crumbling house in Culver City, just a few miles from Hollywood, but a universe away in terms of safety, structure, and overall sanity. The men she spoke to were Dr. Barry Taff and Kerry Gaynor. They were researchers from UCLA's parapsychology lab. They'd investigated cold spots, poltergeist reports, haunted houses, and you get the picture. Nothing prepared them for what they'd encounter at the Bither home. Over the next few months, they would document one of the most disturbing and violent hauntings ever recorded. A case so unsettling, so physically aggressive, that even the most rational minds were left questioning whether there was finally some physical proof of the supernatural. I'm talking real solid evidence here. And what's more disturbing? This story isn't based on folklore and not a Hollywood script, at least not at first. Because everything I'm about to tell you really happened. It was documented, photographed, investigated, later fictionalized into a major motion picture. But unlike most stories that get turned into movies, the real story is much, much worse. I'm John Genoa, and you're watching America's Strangest History. Tonight we're investigating the haunting of Doris Bither. This might just be the first scientifically investigated supernatural assault in American history. Stay with me. To understand this case, you need to understand the woman at the center of it. Doris Bither was, by all accounts, a woman under strain long before she walked into that Westwood bookstore. A single mother raising 4 children in a decaying house in Culver City. Goes without saying, money was tight. Her relationships were fractured. And by the summer of 1974, she began telling friends, and more reluctantly, her own children, that something was in the house and was watching them. The house itself was unremarkable. 2 bedrooms, faded paint, a sagging porch, but inside there were rooms the children refused to enter alone. Lights flickered without cause. Cold air pooled in the corners where no drafts could be found. And worst of all, Doris said she experienced a strange feeling, as if someone stood just behind her shoulder whenever she was alone. At first, she told herself it was stress. 4 kids, a troubled past, and a house in disrepair. Anyone would feel on edge. But then the incidents escalated. Objects began to move. At first, small things. Keys sliding across the countertop, a framed picture falling without explanation. But soon, it was heavier objects, like chairs and lamps, even entire tables shifting a few inches as if pushed by some unseen hand. And then came the injuries. Her eldest son would later tell investigators he saw bruises appear on his mother's arms in real time. Dark, finger-shaped marks when no one was near her. They were scratches as well, some shallow and others deep enough to break skin. The tension in the home grew unbearable. Her children barely slept. Doris began locking her bedroom door, but not to keep anyone out. It was to keep something in. This was the state of her life when she heard about a lecture at a local bookstore. 2 men from UCLA talking about parapsychology, ghosts, and the scientific study of hauntings. She almost didn't go, but something, whether desperation, fear, or the faint hope of getting some answers, pushed her through the door. By the end of that night, she would have met the only people willing to walk into her home and face what she claimed was living there. When Doris first approached Dr. Barry Taff and Kerry Gaynor that night at the bookstore, she expected one of 2 outcomes. Either they'd think she was crazy or they'd help. To her surprise, they didn't laugh and they didn't dismiss her. They actually listened. Taff and Gaynor had both heard stories of haunted houses before. It wasn't their first rodeo. They'd investigated cold rooms, phantom footsteps, the occasional shadow figure. But Doris's account was something else entirely. Objects moving on their own. A constant, oppressive force in the house. And then there was the part where she was almost too embarrassed to say out loud. Violent physical assaults. Within days, they arranged to visit her home. The moment they crossed the threshold, they knew this was no ordinary case. The house felt heavy, thick air like before a thunderstorm. Instruments began to react almost immediately. Temperature recordings dropped abruptly in certain corners. Electromagnetic meters registered spikes where there was no outlets and no wiring. They weren't alone on these visits. Doris's children were there, and so were other observers like students and technicians. Over multiple nights, several people reported seeing luminous anomalies, small orbs of light floating in the dark, occasionally darting across the room as if with intent. And then came the photographs. Using high-speed Polaroid film and multiple cameras positioned through the house, the team managed to capture what they later described as arc-like streaks of light, bright, twisting shapes that seemed to appear midair with no visible source. In one frame, a thick ribbon of light seemed to curl around Doris's upper body. Skeptics would later say these could have been camera malfunctions, but as Taff pointed out, they didn't appear on every photo, only some, only in certain rooms, only when the activity was peaking. The investigators noted other details that they couldn't explain. A smell, sharp, almost chemical. It appeared and vanished without a source. Sudden surges in static electricity that made the hair on their arms stand up. By the end of the first week in the house, they collected dozens of photographs, unusual meter readings, and a string of witness statements, enough to convince them that something was genuinely happening here, but they still didn't know what. And then, the case would take a turn from the unsettling to the horrific. Up until this point, what the UCLA team had witnessed was strange, it was unsettling, but still within the boundaries of what skeptics might explain away. Unusual lights, cold spots, instruments spiking without cause, maybe. That boundary was about to break. Doris had been telling Dr. Taff and Kerry Gaynor something they were reluctant to believe. She claimed she was being physically assaulted by unseen entities, not just shoved or scratched. She said they held her down, that there were 3 of them, and that the attacks were sexual in nature. On the night of August 22nd, 1974, Doris called the team in a panic. When they arrived, she was in her bedroom. The door was locked, the lights were off, she was sitting on the floor trembling. She showed them deep bruises on her inner thighs and her upper arms. They were fresh and dark. Her eldest son confirmed what his mother was too shaken to repeat. He had seen her body jerk violently as if someone were on top of her, but there was no one there. The investigators couldn't verify the assaults in real time, but what they did experience shook them. Temperatures in the room dropped nearly 20 degrees in the matter of seconds. A foul, putrid odor filled the air. It was so strong, several people gagged. One observer reported a sudden, crushing pressure on his chest that lifted as quickly as it came. Doris was terrified. She told them the attacks happened several times a week. And the worst part, moving to another room didn't help. Leaving the house didn't help. In the days that followed, she let them set up monitoring equipment in her bedroom. This included infrared cameras, audio recorders, and even motion sensors. While no full apparition was captured, audio picked up low, guttural sounds that didn't match any person present. The team's skepticism was starting to erode. They entered expecting to debunk a haunting. Now they were documenting a case that felt predatory, intelligent, and utterly beyond their control. What happened next would cement this case as one of the most disturbing ever investigated, and force even seasoned scientists to confront a possibility they never wanted to consider. Even the most seasoned paranormal investigators know the first rule. Start with the ordinary before you jump to the extraordinary. So, the team began by looking at Doris Bither herself. Could her reports have been the product of mental illness? Doris had a troubled history, childhood trauma, failed relationships, a reliance on alcohol. Psychological stress can manifest in strange ways like paranoia, hallucinations, even psychosomatic symptoms like sudden physical manifestations of bruises or wounds, for instance. They also considered the possibility of domestic abuse, injuries inflicted by a person she was too frightened to name. It's not unheard of for victims to disguise an abuser behind supernatural claims. And of course, there was the ever-present possibility of a hoax. Moving objects could be staged. Photographic light arcs could be the result of film damage or deliberate tampering. But here's the problem with each of those explanations. Mental illness doesn't account for the multiple independent witnesses, not just Doris's children, but outside observers who experienced physical phenomena themselves. One technician was shoved hard enough to stumble backward with no one near him. Abuse might explain the bruises, but not the cold spots, the sudden chemical odors, the erratic electromagnetic spikes, or the light anomalies captured on multiple cameras positioned and operated by different people. A hoax would require Doris to somehow manipulate the recordings of professional-grade instruments, all while under constant observation from trained researchers and in the presence of a rotating team of witnesses. Not so easy. Then there were the photographs. In several frames, bright, curling bands of light appeared in midair. Light without a source. The shapes were three-dimensional, twisting through space in a way that no simple lens flare could mimic. Perhaps the most unsettling detail? The phenomena didn't stop when Doris left the house. According to her and her children, it followed her. So this wasn't a haunted building. This was something else. Something that seemed attached. With each rational avenue exhausted, the investigators were left standing on a ledge they never wanted to approach. A ledge that looked out over something they couldn't quantify, they couldn't replicate, and they certainly couldn't control. As they stepped closer to that edge, the activity in Doris's life was about to escalate again. With every conventional explanation crossed off the list, the team began to compare Doris's case to what they knew of other documented hauntings. Some of the hallmarks were there. Sudden unexplained temperature drops, electrical disturbances and light phenomena, an environment charged with conflict and emotional turmoil, often seen in poltergeist cases. But there were differences. Disturbing ones. In most poltergeist activity, objects move, doors slam, perhaps a witness feels a shove or a scratch. The phenomena, though chaotic, tends to be mischievous, disruptive, but rarely sustained and violent. What Doris described and what the evidence hinted at suggested something else, something intelligent. Her experiences weren't random. The activity seemed targeted, as if whatever was behind it understood her and focused on her and wanted to break her. It also followed her. That's not typical. Most hauntings are tied to a location, a house, a building, a stretch of land. Doris's ordeal moved with her. The physical assaults, the shadows, the light arcs, they appeared in different residences far from her Culver City home. The theory that began to form was chilling. This was not a residual haunting, not a mindless echo. This was a sentient entity, perhaps more than one, and it was capable of interacting with its environment in both subtle and brutally physical ways. Some researchers suggested it might have been a rare entity attachment, where a non-human intelligence bonds to a person rather than a place. Got that? Now, if that's true, the implications are unsettling. It means leaving the house doesn't mean leaving it behind. For Dr. Barry Taff and Kerry Gaynor, the turning point came when multiple witnesses, people with no connection to each other, reported seeing the same thing. A tall, shadowy figure, vaguely human in outline, standing silently in Doris's bedroom and then vanishing. No flicker, no slow fade. One moment it was there, the next, nothing. The pattern was emerging, but so was the question that no one wanted to voice. If this entity was aware, and if it could harm, what else was it capable of? And before the case was over, Doris and the investigators were going to find out. By the time the formal investigation ended, Doris Bither's life had changed forever, but not for the better. She left the Culver City house. The bruises, the cold spots, the light phenomena, they didn't stay behind. They followed her. Doris moved several times in the years after 1974. In each new location, she reported the same disturbances, sometimes quieter, sometimes worse. The most unnerving detail? Witnesses, including her own children, say that the activity would flare during periods of stress, almost as if the entity could sense when she was vulnerable. Dr. Barry Taff stayed in contact with her for years, occasionally conducting follow-ups. He came to believe that Doris wasn't dealing with a haunted house, but with an attachment, something that had latched onto her personally and refused to let go. The case was eventually adapted into a 1982 film called The Entity, which took creative liberties but kept the central premise: a woman under attack by an invisible intelligent force. The movie brought the case into popular culture, but it also made Doris's life harder. Strangers doubted her story. Others believed her and feared her in equal measure. She died in 1995, still insisting that what she endured was real. Dr. Taff, decades later, continues to say that the Entity case remains one of the most compelling and disturbing investigations of his career. In his own words, whatever it was real. It interacted with multiple witnesses, and it defied every law of physics we know. And here's where the legacy of the case leaves us. No one ever proved it was paranormal. No one ever proved it wasn't. The photographic evidence, the witness accounts, the physical injuries, they sit in that narrow, uncomfortable place where belief and skepticism collide. So now we're left with a question that investigators themselves couldn't answer. If this wasn't a ghost, if it wasn't a hoax, then what was it? And maybe the most chilling thought of all, where is it now? Nearly 50 years have passed since Doris Bither first told her story in that small Westwood bookstore. The house she lived in is long gone. The investigators have moved on to other cases, but the questions still remain unanswered. Was this a rare, severe case of poltergeist activity? A non-human entity fixated on a single person, or something we don't even have a name for? Because here's the deal. If Doris was telling the truth, then whatever attacked her was intelligent. It was mobile, and it was capable of interacting with the physical world in ways that defy every law of nature we understand. And if that's true, then there's nothing stopping it from finding someone else. This case stands out as one of the few where scientists walked in expecting to disprove a haunting and walked out with more questions than answers. No fraud was proven, no mundane explanation could ever cover every detail, and the phenomena, well, it refused to be neatly packaged and filed away. Maybe that's the scariest thing about this case. It didn't just haunt Doris Bither, it haunts the record. This is America's Strangest History. I want to hear your thoughts. Do you believe Doris was tormented by something paranormal, or is there a rational explanation that's still being overlooked? Could this be a case of extreme psychological and environmental factors converging, or does this stand out as one of the rare times where science meets the supernatural? Drop your theories in the comments, and thanks for watching.